Jennifer Shooter. I'm the Senior Vice President of Marketing for the State Fair of Texas, and welcome to the Blue Ribbon Selection virtual tasting. This is our final one of the fall. The Blue Ribbon Selection was part of our Fair from Home kind of program this year. We weren't able to celebrate this year in person, so this team here at the State Fair wanted to find ways for you to celebrate your State Fair traditions at home, and that could have been learning to cook a funnel cake with our Big Tex Cooking School, or downloading everything you need to have a livestock show at home with your kids. So there's a little bit of everything out there. You can find it all at bigtex.com. We had a lot of fun creating it, but now we're having a lot of fun drinking it. So the Blue Ribbon Selection is part of our opportunity to kind of celebrate Texas wine. Each year, there's a State Fair wine garden where 25 to 30 different wineries rotate in and out and do tastings throughout the 24 days of the fair. Part of our nonprofit mission is to celebrate agriculture, education, and community involvement. And we find that wine is one of those really good ways to bring all of that together. Texas agriculture, from an agricultural standpoint, the wine industry is one of the fastest growing segments of Texas agriculture. It accounts for over 100,000 jobs in Texas, as well as 1.7 million tourist visits. And that's a really big economic impact to the state of Texas. And so we're happy here at the fair to do our little part. So the Blue Ribbon Selection is a mixed case that we put together with a panel of Texas wine experts. It really is, we've had some great wines so far, and I know they're going to be great tonight, but it is a great collection that shows the variety, the quality, and the value of Texas wine. And we're really happy to be out there talking about this and promoting it. So tonight, joining us, we have Shelly Wilfong. She is a wine educator, as well as the creator and host of This is Texas Wine. We have Heather Queen, who is a personal wine concierge. She's also the founder of Queen of Grapes. Both of them were on the panel that helped us put this case together. We have Dave Riley, who is the winemaker at Duchman Family Vineyards. And we also have Randy Hester, who is the owner and winemaker at CL Butaud. So welcome, everybody. And Heather, do you want to kick it off and get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are going to talk to the winemakers here about their wines and what we have going on. We're going to start with Randy. Randy has a great story. I love what we have going on here. And if you haven't tried to lift his bottle of wine yet, you're going to get some really big muscles just from going like this, trying to get that thing open. So Randy, if you talk about Tempranillo, maybe a little bit about why we picked the Tempranillo, because it wasn't our original choice. We were going to go with something different to start with, and then we moved into this one.
Yeah, no, I don't mind going first. I was supposed to go last, and I've had a glass of wine, so I'm good to go. How do I start? So I went away to California to learn winemaking, to learn wine business, and the whole goal is that my sound that's.
I think maybe Dave might need to mute if you can.
I think he just did.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the goal for me was seeing a lot of potential in the Texas wine industry, seeing how the business was booming. Everybody was interested in what's going to happen in Texas. I feel like every 5 years somebody big comes out and says Texas is the next big thing. Texas is the next big thing. And there was all this potential. So in 2006, my wife and I moved to Napa, and I wanted to learn winemaking and the wine business and do this at a high level, give it 10 years, and then bring it home. And the purpose of bringing it home was to elevate Texas wine, to bring in another approach, a fresh approach, an educated, experienced approach. And so at the time, of course, I didn't know that I was going to do Tempranillo. I didn't know what varietals I was going to end up with. But what I did know is that we were looking at coastal Mediterranean varietals. And so over the years, you come home, you visit wineries, you go to Duchman, you go to Pedernales, you go to these other Texas wineries, and you start seeing what's working. And these Spanish varietals, these Italian varietals, these French varietals. And so I come home, and the best red wines that I've had so far had been Tempranillo wines. And so that's where I got going. That's why I chose Tempranillo. Here in Texas, we don't have that established tradition where in Burgundy you have to do Pinot or you have to do Chardonnay, or in Bordeaux you have to do the Bordeaux varietals. We don't have that in Texas. It's a blessing and a curse, but the blessing is we have the freedom, because we don't have that established yet. We have the freedom to choose the varietals that work best for us. And so in my opinion, Tempranillo is the A+ red varietal in the state. I love what a lot of people are doing with Mourvedre. I love what a lot of people are doing with Italian varietals. But for my money, I'm in Tempranillo. I love that I can make the Tempranillo as a medium bodied. I'm not trying to push it too hard. I'm not trying to make a cab out of it. I'm not trying to make a big tannat out of it or something like that. I'm trying to express what Texas Tempranillo can give us with a hands-off approach. And we come up with a medium bodied, we come up with some fruit character that maybe we don't see out of the Tempranillos coming out of the Rioja region. It's probably more New World. It's, more Ribera type Tempranillos, but yeah, that's where we're coming from and why we're here. Does that answer that, Heather?
Yeah, I think so. It was funny because when we were originally putting this box together, we were going to go with the Papa Frenchie.
Right.
And you and I talked, and you're like, no, I really, can we go the Tempranillo? And I was like, no, let's go with the Papa Frenchie. And you're like, no, I really want to go with the Tempranillo. And I'm like, okay, fine. So we'll go with the Tempranillo. But when we were putting it together, that's where we went back and forth with that for a few days. And I kind of wanted people to understand where you were coming from with the Tempranillo, what you were thinking about when you were doing it. And it fits very well with the climate that we have here. And it grows well here. And so you can make a spectacular wine with it, as you have done. So that's really kind of where I wanted to go with it. Can you talk to us a little bit about the characteristics of the wine, the growing of it, of the grape, and then the characteristics of the wine and why you like this one so much?
Yeah, some varietals need extra love. Grenache is one of those. Grenache needs to be babied. It doesn't matter where Grenache is. You have to really pay attention to it. And there's varietals that are harder to grow, and there's varietals that they're kind of like, I don't know, I guess they're middle children. You don't really ever have to worry about them. They're all just kind of hanging out in the background. And Tempranillo seems to be, from the grower's perspective, it's that kind of varietal here where it grows well. If you treat it right, you nourish it, it's going to produce good fruit. I seek out growers who will keep the tonnage in check. I want to see, that root on that vine can only nourish so much of its clusters. And I want to work with growers who see the advantage of putting all of that vine's effort into less clusters and in turn producing fruit with better flavors, better aromas, and better colors. And so that's what I try to do. And then as opposed to my California winemaking, when I started my brand in California, it's Grenache and Grenache-based blends. And so I know that I love European Grenache and Rhone varietals in general, but I didn't know how that would really translate to California fruit in my winemaking. And so what I did was a lot of research on Grenache to try to figure out what style am I gonna. I'm gonna work in a Beaujolais kind of way, in a Burgundy kind of way. How's that gonna translate with California fruit? Well, I did just the opposite when I started making my Texas wines, because I didn't want to go and start researching a bunch of Spanish wines and a bunch of Riojas and Riberas and then also get over into Priorats or go into different Carignans and Mourvedres. I didn't want to do a lot of research and then pigeonhole my Texas wine. What I wanted to do was think about theoretically, how do I want to make Tempranillo, and then let that process translate to me what Texas Tempranillo is going to give us. And so I feel that what I do translates Tempranillo from a Texas terroir, from a Texas environment, from a Texas growing standpoint. And then after that first harvest, then you start to tweak, you start to calibrate. And so I'm listening to what Tempranillo in Texas is giving me and working with that. And the way that it's worked out is a higher fruit profile than you probably see coming out of, say, Rioja, less of those chalky tannins, but then more depth on the palate. And so that's kind of what the Texas Tempranillo is giving me. So that's what I'm going with. I lean into that.
Where's the fruit from, Randy?
So I use different sources on the high plains, all the way from Floydada, north of Lubbock, down to Seminole, south of Lubbock, going towards Roswell, New Mexico. And I use different sources to come up with the ultimate blend on the Tempranillo.
So Randy, you're essentially sourcing from most of the Texas AVAs, is that correct?
Oh, well, I haven't thought about it that way, but yeah, I guess, yeah. I definitely seek out growers. I know a lot of times I feel like people are seeking out tonnage. I have to make this wine, so I have to go find this fruit, that kind of thing. I'm a small producer. I'm still, my wines are, this Tempranillo is 250 cases every year, so that's small. And so what I do is I go find growers, and first, of course, they have to have varietals that I want to make wine from, but then I start talking and I start, how do they feel about growing? How do they feel about the end consumer? How do they feel about the quality of the product that they're putting out? Because what I need to do is trust that my grower partners are doing their job well, and then they have to trust me that they can pass it off to me, and they trust that I'm going to do my job well. And without that, we can't cohesively get to the end consumer and put together the best wines, put our best foot forward. And that's been the whole point of the last 15 years of my life, has been to make great Texas wine and to put that best foot forward.
And in case people don't know CL Butaud, do you want to say a word about your label, the name CL Butaud?
Sorry, I was a little parched. Yes, CL Butaud is my great grandfather. It's Texanized French name. The French would probably say Butaud, and but we have it enunciated on our website. We have it actually spelled out. So anyway, it's CL Butaud, and CL Butaud was the given name for my great grandfather. He was known to friends and family as Frenchie, and to us kids, he was Papa Frenchie. And so, and he was kind of a Superman to me. He was everything that I wanted to be. I was born in 1970, and he didn't die till 1994. So, I had 20 years with my great grandfather, 24 years with my great grandfather. So he was a Superman to me. I looked up to him, and I felt like he could do anything. And so we called the wine CL Butaud, and we call our second label Papa Frenchie. And then we put the DearDana.com Dear Dana sketch of my Papa Frenchie on that label. So that's a really cool, art collaboration that we have with Dana Veraldi. So those are the reasons behind the two names.
So I'm going to kind of play off the two of you here for a second. Dave, how much of your grapes are y'all sourcing, and how much of y'all are the grapes you're growing? Because I'm looking out of the tasting room, and there's a ginormous vineyard out there.
Ginormous would be a relative term, I think. And actually what you're looking at is not only a portion of that vineyard actually belongs to us that we farm. The rest of it belongs to our neighbors next door. we decided kind of early on that we were going to make wine. Our focus was wine driven. I guess close to 20 years ago when I got in this business, and somebody who'd been in the business for a while had said, let chemists make wine and let farmers grow grapes. And I've done both. I started out on the growing side and got into winemaking. But I could echo a lot of what Randy said in terms of working with different growers, where we source fruit, because we knew going into this that we weren't going to farm all of the acreage it would take to produce between 15 and 25,000 cases annually. So we were sourcing growers and really only working with growers that I have distilled down to the Binghams, the Oswalds, and VJ Reddy, who I've worked with all three of those growers the entire time. I've worked with some other growers, just those from the High Plains, but distilled it down to those with a really good working relationship, and at this point, personal friendships with each of them. I vineyard designate at every opportunity I can. In fact, I work towards vineyard designation to credit the growers. My stand in this has always been Texas wine should support Texas agriculture. Know where your fruit comes from, know where your wine comes from. If the fruit comes from California, the wine comes from California, and that's not a problem. I love California wines, and I'm not going to get on that soapbox here. But we do put the growers' names on the labels so that you know who we're working with, and that was a way early on to say to these guys, have as much pride in the fruit that you send me as I have in the wine that I produce from the fruit that you grow. Your name is on the bottle, same as ours. There's Duchman, there's Oswald right there. Duchman's bigger, but we won't get into that. But to echo another thing that Randy touched on is, we didn't really just want to pigeonhole ourselves into Italian varieties only. We were really committed to making wines from grapes that grow well in the state of Texas, period. There was not a limitation on that. What turned out to be kind of at the forefront of that were grapes like Montepulciano, Aglianico, Sangiovese, Vermentino, and Trebbiano. But we do also work with Tempranillo because we're obviously doing great things with Tempranillo in the state, and also Viognier, I think does well. My commitment, kind of my Italian leaning varietal side, comes from the consistency of the crops that we see from Aglianico and Montepulciano to really be kind of power players for us, because in the kind of in the worst of vintages, we see a really good crop, and in the best of vintages, we see a outstanding crop between those two.
So we just drank a bottle of the Aglianico while we were here. It was great. It was fabulous. But we're talking about the Montepulciano is the one that we put into the box.
Sure.
So talk about Montepulciano, and I'll give you a little feedback on not feedback. This is just me. 8 years ago was the first time I ever came to Duchman, and it was quite a magical experience for me, because it actually made me say, oh, I like Texas wine. I'm a Texan. I want to drink Texas wine. We sat outside. It was cold. We had some wine. And then at that point, my Texas wine journey kind of began. So can you talk a little bit about the Montepulciano, what it is? It's really the wine that you make a lot of, that you get out there, that's well made, and that people see often. Is that a correct statement?
It is, and I'll touch on Aglianico just briefly because you brought it up. Aglianico has become probably in the last 12 years one of my favorite grapes my favorite grapes to work with, I would say, my favorite red grape would be Aglianico. I love that wine.
Dave, it's my number one varietal that I want to make next that I've never made. Yeah,
Make it.
Maybe I could. Maybe I could do that with you in 2021.
I recommend it. I would tell you won't regret. Well, I'll take that back. You might regret working with Aglianico. It is fickle in the cellar. It can be difficult. It's a big grape. But I love it, and I've consistently loved the wines vintage after vintage from that. That said, and it is, I just saw a pop-up message that is in distribution. So if you want to try the Aglianico, please go to your favorite wine shop and ask for it. They'll be able to get it. We're distributed. So Montepulciano, I won't even say is a close second. It's a right up there second. Those kind of both those grapes for me go hand in hand. I love them both, and the Oswalds do an outstanding job growing both of those grapes for us, vintage after vintage. And if you don't know the Oswalds, it's a family business, a truly family business, and there are probably more footprints in that vineyard than any other vineyard in the state. I would say I couldn't compliment them more on the job they do growing both of these grapes for me. Montepulciano is a beautiful wine to me, and I think, I don't remember, I started to touch on something Randy said about, I'm not trying to emulate Italian Montepulciano, Italian Aglianico. Our goal all along was what is Texas Aglianico? What is Texas Montepulciano? What is Texas Sangiovese? Texas Vermentino, and to some degree, I think we've had more success with Vermentino in the state of Texas than Italy had with Vermentino. I'm talking big, but bear with me. But I think Montepulciano is one of those where we're playing the same game as Italy. I'm not trying to imitate Italy. I'm not trying to make Italian wines. But if you put 10 wines on the table and you've got 2 Texas Montepulcianos on the table and 8 Montepulcianos from Italy, we're playing the same game, and I feel the same about Aglianico as well. And that's kind of where I love those wines. You don't have to make excuses for either one of them by any means. In fact, sometimes people wonder why Montepulciano from Texas can be so much bigger and robust and more serious than its Italian counterparts. And my answer is, to me, I just think we take it more seriously. I'm trying to make a world-class wine from Montepulciano where, the Italians are growing tons of varietals they're making world-class wines out of, and not saying we're better or worse.
I don't think it's a matter of whether we're better or worse. We're just different. And this has been a common theme that we've seen over the webinars of people talking about what are we trying to do with Texas wine? We're trying to make Texas wine. We're not trying to make Italian wine. We're not trying to make Spanish wine. We're making those varietals in Texas, and we're trying to show the Texas terroir of that area. And I think that's what people are trying to compare. And there's not really a comparison. Yeah, it's the same varietal, but it's grown halfway across the world from each other. So, it's kind of Riesling from the Mosel versus Riesling from Eden Valley. They're in 2 different hemispheres. I mean, they're not the same thing.
Well, and kind of the other side of the statement I would make is Sangiovese. Dr. Duchman and I had conversations early on about Sangiovese and whether or not we would continue to produce it, because, like I said, our Montepulciano, Aglianico, Vermentino, Trebbiano put us on a table with any Italian counterpart, and I'm proud of what we're producing. Sangiovese is a different grape in Texas, and I would actually kind of qualify Sangiovese with Texas Sangiovese more than any other grape varietal, because it does make a very different Sangiovese. We're never gonna, will speak for Duchman and myself, that never striving to make a Brunello. We make something that borders between a red wine and a rosé, and it's quite delicious. And it's a great summertime red wine. But does it taste like some of the big Italian counterparts? No. And I don't want to say never, but for us at Duchman, it never will. We're not trying to make those wines.
So I'm curious, you guys you've been making wine here in Texas, what, 15 years, Randy?
No, my first vintage was 2014 here in Texas.
So were you in California before? Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So I've been making wine since 2006.
So you've been making wine a long time. And Dave, you've been making wine here at Duchman for how long?
Since 2006, I planted my first vineyard 20 years ago.
Yeah. So tell me about the differences that you see now versus 5 years ago versus 10 years ago versus even 15 years ago, and how the wine has evolved, and as the 5th largest state making wine, how it kind of sets into the United States market, and how those wines are getting out into the market. There were 3 questions there.
Randy, who's going first here?
Well, I mean, so I can't speak to 20 and 15 years ago, except from being outside of the Texas.
I'll take that one when you finish, Randy, if you like.
Yeah. Well, so I met Dave with a guy named Dan Redmond, long time ago.
Yeah.
When Duchman was first getting going and everything was happening, because at that time I was with the distributor. I was in the fine wines division and meeting folks from all over the world. But Dan was one of the guys. Dan knew everybody. But we had Flat Creek. So Flat Creek was in the book of wines that I sold. And so Brooke and I became friends with Rick and Madeline, and Rick's a pretty fiery dude, and he said that I'm the only person in the state of Texas selling his wine, and so he liked me, and so that was a good thing. But yeah, we hung out with them. We were at Flat Creek a lot. We spent a lot of weekends out there, and that's when I started really paying attention to the Texas wine industry. I started paying attention a lot to price points, and then price points for that quality level. And so it from back in like the year 2000, 2001, 2002, I already had it cemented in my head that a wine should overperform at that price point. And so that was the big rub with Texas wines, say back in 2004, was that why should I pay $30 for Sangiovese that I can buy a $12 wine of the world, and it's going to far outperform that wine from Texas. And so again, not as a production person like Dave was here in 2006. In 2006, I was already in California, but that was my perspective. I was getting the pushback from the sales point of view. And then I thought, okay, Texas wine has huge potential, but we just have to get it right. We have to figure it out and dial it in and get it to the people. Because what's the number now? Jason, I think a couple weeks ago said 95% of Texas wines are sold to Texans. And that was the case back in 2002, 2004, 2006. Texas is third in the country in consumption of wine or wine sales, 5th in the country in production, but 90 to 95% of our wines are sold to Texans. And so those are huge numbers. So that just tells you all you have to do is increase the quality, and then you'll gain respect worldwide. And I can break it down 20, 15, 10, and 5 from my own perspective, but Dave, jump in.
Our deal is that we're producing as much as we can produce and selling it all within the state. And so there's no real incentive for us to get out of state at this point until we ramp up production enough to where we've saturated the Texas market. But right now we're kind of our growth strategy is organic, and so we're growing right now, but we're still selling everything within the state. So we haven't gotten to a point where we go, okay, well, what the warehouse is more full than Texas consumers will buy. So let's go out of state. But the Heather, your question about the last 10, 15, 5 years. Probably the biggest shift I think in our industry happened when people that I will say had a quote unquote retirement dream of retiring to a vineyard or retiring to a winery wised up and hired a winemaker. And this isn't a like self-promotional thing, but really I think the game stepped up when people maybe from California and other countries started coming into Texas, seeing that there was a wine scene here. Very, very qualified winemakers starting moving into positions that previously were held by the owners that were retiring to a winery, and they'd read some books and they made wine in 5-gallon buckets, and now all of a sudden they're making it in a 500-gallon tank, or even perhaps a 5,000-gallon tank, with not enough experience and education to actually do it well. And so I think what's really turned our industry around is an influx of wineries willing to hire competent winemakers, professional winemakers, or consultants, whatever. But I think that's really launched Texas into a different level, is really the education of the people behind the scenes making the wine.
And what Dave won't admit, I'm sure, is that he was one of the drivers of that push dude, one of the drivers for that push for the higher quality wines. Chris was right there. It was the younger crowd coming in and going, we've got to stop producing flawed wines. And there was I'm sitting in California. I'm sitting in 100 Point wineries, and I'm coming back for Twigas, and I'm starting to meet folks and trying to figure out who's who and who, everything. I went to a Hill Country breakout session, and there was a meeting going on, and everybody brought bottles, and I'd put them on a table at the front of the room, and 22 out of 27 of those bottles were flawed. And then that was the Twiga where you and all those guys said, this we've got to do better. We've got to put that better foot forward. And you and all those guys drove that at that time. And I think today we sit here and we talk about the exponential growth and quality in the Texas wine industry has to do with that core group of guys that you were a part of back in 08, 09, and 10, and really saying, hey, basically like, hey, old guys, like, let us take care of this, well, we see this thing a little differently, and it's probably the way the rest of the world does it. So let's get after it, like in that direction.
Well, and thank you, but I'll credit Mark Penna, who he was an old guy. He was my mentor, but he was the first one to tell me what the winemaker's curse was, and that's being able to identify flaws in wine, and focus on flaws in wine, and it's in teaching me it's not just good because you made it; it has to be good, and helping teaching me what flaws are and how they happen, and microbiological stability and all the things that really go into winemaking. that he knew and that he passed along to me before he passed away. But I think, the big shift happened when people maybe who didn't have the winemaker's curse were making the wines and saying, isn't this great because I made it? And the answer is, this has got so much VA that I won't even put it in my mouth. But I think we're getting to a point where, there was a different generation of guys that kind of came in and really started, I hate to say it, but focusing on the flaws. I like clean wine. I like interesting wine, but I don't like the first thing I smell to be a flaw. And Randy, I think you're spot on that one.
So we have a question here. So is the push for quality winemakers 10 years ago or 20 years ago?
So 20 years ago was 2020, and I think you can probably back this whole thing up to probably about there. I was we got kind of serious in the 80s, making wine, and then by about 2020, I'll say that's when I entered the industry as a grower, and I felt like things were moving, but there again, 20 years ago, they're not at all like they are today.
So Dave, you mean 2000? Do you mean 2000? Because you were saying.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, the year 2000. I apologize. 20 years ago, I'm getting all my 20s and zeros mixed up. So in 2000, I think, and again, my point of reference comes from there because that's when I entered the Texas wine industry. But it was because we were kind of on this elevated path, and I think it's grown exponentially. What started out as, say, in 2005 of like, wow, Texas wines are kind of coming around, to 2010 being like, man, some of these Texas wines are actually making an impression on people. And 2015, man, they're a bunch of gold medals, double gold medals in out of state and out of country competitions by that point. So it's really, we've just kind of launched forward in the thing to understand is right now we're at 2020. We just had the 2020 harvest of Aglianico, which Duchman stays in barrel for about 3 years, and then in the bottle for about a year before we release it. So what we're talking about now as a vintage, we can't talk about for 4 years until it reaches the consumer. And so this is 2017. Montepulciano was actually released a little bit early because we had some low yield years that got us a little bit back on that same program as Montepulciano and Aglianico. But we'll get back to kind of that program. And so, it's like I as a winemaker, I'm talking about 2015 or 2016, like it's right now today, because that's when the wine is released, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I agree with some of the folks on the chat about the 10-year threshold. That's kind of when I started seeing it, when I'm in another state and I'm coming home and I'm watching. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to fit in when I get back. To me, it's that 2010. The last 5 to 10 years have just been incredible, and it's boosted Texas. In my mind, it's boosted Texas wines onto the world stage, and I can say that with confidence, and I would say that in any room, any place in the world with anybody that I would come across. We are producing wines in Texas that can be on any table in the world, and people would enjoy the wines. But I definitely think that 10 years ago, for me, from my perspective, was the turning point. And then in the last 5 years, things have just gone bonkers. It's a lot of fun to watch, because you could see it coming. And it's just been so much fun to watch.
Well, and our deal at Duchman is like the best red wines we have are in the cellar. I mean, I think our wines are getting better every year. Our growers are getting better at growing every year. I learn more about making the wines with these varietals every year. And so the best wines are yet to come. And that's the exciting part for me is I'm 4 or 5 years out from showing you what I'm working with on some of these wines.
That's funny. Does the name Tom Rinaldi ring a bell with anybody? Tom was the original Duchman winemaker, and he's the guy that basically made Merlot in the 80s. He did the Three Palms Merlot vineyard, and he ended up doing Provenance, which is part of the Diageo portfolio. But Tom, when people would say, "Oh, what's the best year? What's the best vintage?" He'd say the next one.
I like that.
It was always the one.
Good
coming.
answer.
Yeah.
Good answer.
Not to be for sale.
Yeah, so I love that. I totally steal that. I will, except for this call, I will not give Tom credit for that.
So I wanted to ask Shelly a question to ask y'all. How do you feel being a panelist with Texom and the wines that come through there and win the different awards? How do you feel like Texas wines have shown up in those awards and in the judging of the wines over the past 5 years?
Well, let me be clear. I'm not a judge for Texom. I'm a volunteer. So I'm not at the panel tasting all the Texas wines. But from what I hear from the judges, like everyone has said, the wines just get better and better. And I am a judge for the Lone Star International wine competition that's happening next week. And a lot of the same wines are entered in both. And I can verify that that's the case with that competition as well, that the wines keep getting better and better. I was going to relay one story. I interviewed Jessica Dufuy this week, and she is a journalist, and she's written a lot about Texas wine. She's been writing about Texas wine since 2007 and has written primarily for Texas Monthly. And she has a new book out, and she tells this whole story. It's really her story to tell in the podcast that I have coming out tomorrow. But her book is about the wines of the Southwest USA. So it's not just Texas, but it's also Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. And so it's all these emerging wine regions. And Texas is, of course, the biggest state out of those. But she covers them, and she's clear that she's not just a cheerleader for Texas wine, but she's covering the region as a journalist. And so she has a lot of interesting comments about the industry and also about the other states and what they're doing particularly well. And my kind of consulting background mind wants to delve into, okay, what are the best practices and how do we enact those in Texas? And she said, oh, well, it's not a competition. I said, well, kind of it is actually. But she said in 2007, when she started covering this industry, that her first assignment was go find out if there's even a story here. I mean, is there anything to even tell about, and do people care? So, and that just goes to show in 2007, it was questionable if it was even, worth printed paper. And then now this is what we have. This isn't Texas Monthly, this is D Magazine, but this is this month's D Magazine. And apparently this is selling like hotcakes across Dallas-Fort Worth area. So this is good news. I mean, this is what I think it turns the tide, that people think, oh, okay, this is cool now. All right, we'll go see what's going on down in Texas.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great article. If you haven't read it, it's a fantastic article.
It really is.
And really, it sheds a light on the Texas wine market and the hill country and the high plains and kind of what everybody's doing and bringing the Texas wines up into a level that are competitive. I have an interesting question. It's not really to down on California right now with what's going on, but how do you think the two, Randy and Dave, how do you think that the fires in Napa and Sonoma and there really not being much of a vintage coming out of there is going to impact the Texas wine market?
I'll speak to that real quickly, and I'm going to let Randy take it away. The 2020 vintage in Texas was about as very near to zero as I've seen since in the 20 years that I've been in it. Only to kind of the runner up to that would be 2013. To anybody that keeps up with vintages in Texas, we did only a small fraction of what we normally produce this year, which would include kind of 0 tons of a lot of white wine varietals that we work with. Fortunately, did receive some Roussanne from the Oswalds that seem to be relatively unaffected by. I'll explain a freeze event that happened in October of last year. Wreaked havoc on our harvest for this year. So I'll speak to what I know in Texas. Randy, yeah, it's going to be a tough one for California.
Yeah, that freeze, there's some vineyards in Texas that are down 100%. And I think the average number might have been about down about 60%. I think if I could just do rough math, the average for wineries, I feel like we were probably all down about a third, once you spread out all that loss across all the wineries across Texas. And
I would, speaking for Duchman, we were probably down 75, between 60 and 75% as far as yield, going with harvest yield numbers.
That's huge. That's huge. Yeah, when you get into having, a big production and a small amount of growers, there's goods and bads to it. But yeah, man, it's tough here, but it's tough here this year because of those freezes. But it's tough sometimes in all wine regions. It's Burgundy and Beaujolais and Napa or Sonoma or whatever. Even down in LA they have fires. So I don't like to think about folks bringing grapes or juice or wine from other states here to Texas, but because if for me personally, if I can't make great wine on any given year, then I'm just not going to make that wine. I'm certainly not going to supplement anything from somewhere else. I think the fires in California, and they've been happening somewhere in California over the last 5 years or so. I think it has already been affecting probably some producers, some wine businesses here in Texas. I can't help but think there's going to be some folks whose business models are going to suffer, because of the fires,
well, on the production side, sure, you bring up a very valuable point. On the consumer side, and maybe this is the ultimate question, does the California, for the 2020 vintage, do we see enough of a decrease worldwide for California wine distribution that leaves the consumer maybe to reach for Texas wine? I don't know, but I don't know if there's crossover there. I think we're
that was really my question. Do you see as this is occurring, does the consumer turn toward, if you're in Texas, do you turn towards Texas wines because the availability of the California wines aren't necessarily going to be there?
Well, and for the vintage of 2020, largely the Texas wines aren't going to be there either. We're set up for just a straight skip from 2019 Vermentino to 2021 Vermentino. There is no 2020 Vermentino from Duchman. There is no 2020 Trebbiano or Viognier. And there will be, like I said, we're gonna we've produced a 2020 Roussanne, which is a beautiful wine. We've worked with Roussanne since 2017, but we're fortunate enough Roussanne was not really affected by this freeze event, so we have one white wine for 2020. Fortunately, we build into our model years like this because we are in Texas. There was 7 years ago, the same thing, 2013, we made essentially zero white wine in that year, and we were able to bridge the gap. We set ourselves up for it is about a 1 in 7 year where you get a total loss. But we build our inventory for that.
Sure.
Big year for Cinsault too. Roussanne and Cinsault seem to be the two varietals that everybody had access to this year.
Yeah. It'll be another winner will come out in 5 to 7 years from now that we don't know why. You know,
Right.
it's another one will rise to the top.
I think an even bigger consumer trend may be more people road tripping and taking trips to wineries that are in Texas instead of flying out to California for vacation. So they'll buy
And
whatever on the shelf right now, and it's, you know, whatever vintage is there, and take their trips and maybe make some longer term connections with Texas wineries that'll serve us all well in years to come.
And Duchman is very much open as safely as we can be. We're doing bottle sales, and for those of you that have not been to Duchman, we have a huge front lawn where you can hang out. And man, I'm impressed. I have not seen people prep to picnic like I have with this pandemic. People show up with basically like a full backyard patio setup and set it up in our front lawn, and we have beautiful oak trees, and they hang out and drink wine. And I'm glad we can safely provide that experience for people during this time. But you know, unfortunately, our tasting room is closed for safety precaution. But
Here's what it looks like. So when you can't,
there's a corner of it, yeah, but we're thrilled that our fans continue to support us through all this, and know the importance of supporting these local businesses that really depend on our kind of our fan base, our customers, to keep buying our product. Come and visit us, buy us from the grocery store, do those things and help us kind of bridge this gap of 2020 to kind of keep it going. We depend on our fan base and our loyal customers.
And Randy, do you want to say what you've got going on coming up later this fall?
Yeah, we're actually opening a tasting room this fall. We're a few weeks away at this point, and it's going to be South Austin. Where Ray Wilson's going to be in there with us. Wine for the People and Dandy Rosé, and I busted up Ray pretty good about her dog barking the way, and then the way she jumped. She was like, because Ray's so intense, and then like that dog bark, and she was like, ah. But yeah. So we're gonna have a shared tasting space with Wine for the People, and yeah, that's coming. It's right around the corner. For folks who are familiar with the beer scene in Austin, it's not far from Jester King. We're halfway between Jester King and Treaty Oak. It's where the old Argus Cidery was, and so we are setting up for hospitality. So I am thirsty to hang out with our wine club and our mailing list and our supporters. It's something that I haven't had since we moved out of Napa. We had a tasting room in Napa. People visit us from all over the country. Here we've been wine club only, direct to consumer, and then we do events. And so now I'm just excited to have this space for folks to come down from Dallas-Fort Worth and all around the state and all around the country to just come hang out, and let's get back face to face. And we have a lot of outdoor space. We're gonna have food. We're gonna do movie nights, industry nights. We're gonna kind of weave into the fabric of the neighborhood and what's going on around us.
Jennifer just posted a little note in the chat session there. We are going to continue the Texas 12-pack through the end of October. If people are looking to purchase it, if you are looking for other wines in your area and you cannot find them, feel free to shoot me a message. I will be more than happy to locate them for you. I've been locating wine all day today, so I've been pretty good. I found some good wines. So if you're looking for something that you don't necessarily see in the 12 pack that you want to try or you want to get, you can let me know, or you can, I know Shelly got an email the other day from somebody that we can make that happen for you if you can't locate one of the wines you're looking for.
Heather, I know we don't have Doug Lewis on, but you put this little nice Lewis wine in the box too. This is a blend.
Let me tell you a little bit about Doug Lewis's wine here. It's a Grenache Mourvedre. It's kind of fun. I actually was talking to him as I was talking to people and trying to determine what we were going to put in the box. I sent him a message. I'm talking to the Serendipity rep, and I said, I really want a really cool wine. Well, he just made this wine. He just released it right as the box was coming out. So he sent me a bottle. We put it together. It's a Grenache Mourvedre blend. It's light. It's fun. And as I was talking to him about it, he was literally on his tractor talking to me on his phone about harvesting the grapes. We're in the middle of harvest. He's on a tractor and he's like, I really want to do this wine. And I said, all right, let's get a bottle and let's do it. What I love about this wine is that it's a red wine that you can drink in the summer and not get overwhelmed with. A lot of people, not a lot of people, some people don't drink red wine in the summer because it's so hot here. Well, this one you can drink and you're not gonna just be overwhelmed with a heat stroke in that moment. So I love what he's done with it. I love the red fruits that are in it, and I love that it's also a brand new wine that he's just released, like literally just released 3 weeks ago.
I noticed it's pretty low alcohol. It's like 13%.
Yeah,
It's nice. It'd be nice with a little chill on it.
drink the whole bottle, you're not going to feel really bad the next day. You might just feel a little bad. I'm probably not going to feel bad at all because I drink a whole bottle of wine every day. But
I've still never met Heather in person, but I can't wait to meet Heather in person.
well, when you
And nobody here is judging, by the way.
I'm good with it. I tell my doctor on a regular basis, I'm sorry, it's my job. It's what I do.
One serving, that's all your doctor needs to know.
That's right. Leon from Republic once had that conversation with me. He said, yeah, I told my doctor I drink like 8 glasses of wine before noon. What did your doctor say? So I love this wine. It's a great summer wine. And you know what? It's going to be one of those wines too that you can carry into the holidays. You can pair it with your Thanksgiving dinner. You can pair it. You can have it all by itself. You can have it with something. And we've gone through all these webinars, and I really feel like this is the wine that pairs with the corn dog. That's just my personal opinion. I've been waiting for this one to say that because this goes with the Fletcher's Corny Dog.
If I would have just saved a few from Sunday, the last day of the drive-through, we could have tried it tonight.
And I would have been right there eating the corn dog with you. My poor parents, they were like, can you just send us some corn dogs? So I don't think they're going to hold up, Mom, but I'll try.
A little note from the fair. They do actually surprisingly travel well. We ship them a lot for media and things like that. And if they're packaged right and refrigerated, they will hold up in a little transit and can be reheated.
Yeah. I didn't get my corn dog this year. I'll have to wait for next year. But I did get a football game, so I'm very excited about that.
Well, on that note, it looks like we're about wrapped up with time. I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. As we kind of round out, October is Texas Wine Month, so you still have a little bit of time to get out there and get a little Texas wine. But I'd just like to say cheers to both Randy and Dave, and thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it and enjoyed drinking your wine. And anybody who didn't watch this, we are recording it, so we will post this tomorrow for everybody to watch.
And before you log off, somebody just asked, are there any more webinars? And that's interesting that you asked that question, so I'm going to let you answer it.
Well, we are, one of the things that, we've looked at as we kind of created all of the Fair from Home activities is that there has been some stuff that has resonated. And so there may be more, we'll see. We looked at, I think that there's some opportunity for us to do this at, this was sort of during the fair window, but I think we definitely have some opportunity to continue to showcase this wine throughout the entire year. So stay tuned.
And a lot of wineries host webinars all year long. So be sure and follow your favorite wineries on social media.
That is true.
Thank you
Thanks, guys.
so much, y'all.
Cheers.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Glad to be here tonight.
Yeah.
Bye.